Today, we're diving into a global showdown fought not with tanks and planes, but with interest rates and balance sheets, a conflict where the weapon of choice is money itself. We are talking about the currency wars. It all kicked off with this one sentence. Back in 2010, Brazil's finance minister, Guido Mantega, said this, and it sent absolute shockwaves around the world. He put a name to a fight that had been brewing under the surface for years, and he basically fired the starting gun. So how did we even get to a point where a finance minister was declaring a war? Well, to really get it, we have to rewind the clock to the rubble of the 2008 global financial crisis. By 2009, economies everywhere were on their knees. People weren't spending, businesses were closing, and countries got desperate. Everyone, from the big guys to the emerging markets, landed on the exact same strategy to save themselves. They had to export their way back to prosperity, and that meant everybody wanted an edge over everybody else. And this is the main tactic in a currency war. It's called competitive devaluation. And the goal is really simple. Make your money cheaper. See, if your currency is weaker, the stuff you sell to other countries becomes a whole lot more attractive. And at the same time, all the foreign goods coming into your country get more expensive. So your own people are more likely to buy local. It's a tricky game that can quickly turn into a race to the bottom.
So let's just break down who wins and who loses here. If you're a country that devalues your currency, your exporters are loving it. Your local businesses are happy too, because they have less competition from pricey imports. But there's always a flip side, right? The losers are the importers and, regular people, consumers, who suddenly have to pay more for anything from another country. And yeah, that trip you were planning abroad, it just got way more expensive.
Now, in this global scramble for an export advantage, a few key players really took center stage. And their clashing game plans are what created this massive economic battlefield. First up, the United States. To fight its own brutal recession, the Federal Reserve launched this huge program called quantitative easing, or QE. Now, in simple terms, this just meant pumping a ton of new money into the U.S. economy. The main goal was domestic, but a major side effect was that it made the U.S. dollar weaker. And that was like firing one of the first big shots in this war, even if it wasn't on purpose.
Then, on the other side of the planet, you have China. For years, the US and other nations had been putting serious pressure on Beijing to let its currency, the yuan, get stronger. But China just wasn't having it. They deliberately kept the yuan low because that's what fueled their unbelievable export machine. And this, right here, was a huge source of tension.
But this wasn't just a two-country fight. All that new money being printed in the US had to go somewhere, right? It flooded into emerging markets like Brazil, South Korea, and Thailand. This huge wave of cash pushed their currencies way up, which made their exports more expensive and started to really hurt their economies. They were caught in the crossfire. And so countries like Brazil started to fight back on their own, doing things like taxing foreign money coming in. Okay, so with things getting really nasty, the world's economic referees, we're talking about institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the G20, they had to step in. They were desperately trying to stop this whole thing from spiraling out of control. And the head of the IMF at the time, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, he did not mince words. He warned everyone that using currencies as policy weapons was a direct threat to the super fragile global recovery. The big fear was that this race to the bottom would just lead to protectionism everywhere and choke off global trade completely.
But you know what? Even with those really serious warnings, a solution was nowhere in sight. You had all these tense meetings in 2010 that were all about the currency dispute. The US kept hammering China, and China and other countries just blamed the US for its policies. In the end, everyone was just looking out for themselves, and the meetings ended in a total stalemate. No peace treaty was signed.
So if the diplomats failed, what actually stopped the war? Well, it didn't end with some big agreement. Instead, the battlefield itself started to shift because a new, common enemy showed up for a lot of these countries. And that enemy was inflation. By the middle of 2011, things really started to cool down. For a lot of those emerging economies, having cheap imports was suddenly causing prices at home to skyrocket. And that was painful. All of a sudden, having a weak currency wasn't looking so great anymore. So to fight inflation, they actually started letting their own currencies get stronger. The war talk faded away. Yeah, things flared up a little bit later, but the most intense phase was over. But here's the crucial part. The fundamental disagreements that started it all, they were never actually solved. And that brings us to the legacy of that whole chaotic period. To try and prevent another global free-for-all, a more formal system was put in place. Think of it like a watch list for the world's currencies. A big part of this effort is led by the U.S. Treasury Department. They now regularly check up on America's major trading partners, looking for any signs of funny business with currencies. This is a direct result of the currency war, an attempt to finally lay down some rules of the road. So how does this watch list actually work? Well, the Treasury has this 3-point checklist. First, they check if a country has a really big trade surplus with the US. Second, they look for a big current account surplus with the rest of the world. And third, they watch to see if a country is constantly and deliberately meddling in the markets to keep its own currency down. If a country checks 2 of those 3 boxes, it gets placed on an official monitoring list. And as you can see from a recent table, this whole issue is far from over. A lot of the key players from the original currency war, like China and Japan, are on this list, along with big European economies like Germany and Switzerland. This watch list is a crystal clear sign that the world's economic powers are still keeping a very, very close eye on each other. And all of this leaves us with one final and really crucial question. The open fighting of 2010 might have died down, but the weapons, the tensions, and the self-interests that lit the fuse in the first place, they're all still there. The monitoring lists exist for a reason. So the question isn't whether peace was ever achieved, but whether we're all just living through a very fragile ceasefire.